What's up, guys and gals of the movement world? It's Sean Mishka, the Movement Miyagi, coming to you once again on behalf of Football Beyond the Stats and our Movement Play of the Week, this week for Week 6 of the 2023 National Football League season. And this week, just like what we've seen in the previous 5 weeks, we're going to see an awfully skilled player, a player who's attuned and intentional and adaptable. We're going to see a player who, in this emerging and unfolding problem, the dynamic problem, really finding this connection and this close coupling through his perceptions, his cognitions, and his actions, and the coordination, control, and organization of those movement solutions to fit the what is, to fit the emerging and unfolding problem around him. So we're going to see wide receiver from the Detroit Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown, in all of his glory. We're going to see him perceiving and selecting and acting upon shared affordances that are present from his teammates that he was feeding into, how that perpetually feeds into how he solves a movement problem. So like what we do here at Football Beyond the Stats and our Movement Play of the Week, let's go ahead and watch it at full speed. We can see St. Brown here. Again, Detroit Lions, Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa Bay on Sunday in a tie game 3-3 in the second quarter. Obviously, St. Brown here, you could see him all gassed up in all of his Kinesio tape glory. And all power to him. Obviously, if it gets him through the game and something that helps him flip that trigger, by all means, go ahead and do what you do, because obviously we're talking about a guy who's made a really quick impression in the National Football League at just 23 years old. I want you guys, as you watch this at full speed, and then as we get into 50% speed and we see it from the other view, I want you to really kind of think about St. Brown, his form of life, his movement toolbox, his ways of being and acting. Try to think about how it might compare to maybe some other wide receivers in the National Football League and how they might solve problems. And that's really where we want this discussion to be. So if we watch St. Brown down here again in the slot, working off of Jared Goff, we're only going to be able to see a few views, but I pause it here because, again, we want to think about how might we, as movement and skill acquisition specialists, potentially guide and channel similar types of movement behaviors from the athletes we work with. Remember, all this analysis is only worth so much if it doesn't feed into how we might practically design movement problems for players to solve in our applicable learning environments, right? So we see St. Brown here now. I want you to really pay close attention to this nuance and the details of it. I know that I'm constantly imploring everybody here at Football Beyond the Stats and our Movement Play of the Week to do exactly that. But there's going to be some nuances that we want to get into here as we see his buddy Craig Reynolds. We see St. Brown's buddy Craig Reynolds enter the mix, and we're going to be able to have a discussion around that here today. One more time at full speed, I hope. And what we're going to find as we get into the slow motion and we see these local movement problems by local movement problems, again, I want you to think about the what is right there in front of St. Brown, as well as the what could be, because when push comes to shove here, this movement problem could have played out in any number of ways, right? And I think that part is really kind of important and imperative to circle the wagons around, that no two problems are ever the same, thus neither are any two solutions, and how a player is acting moment to moment is perpetually feeding into how the problem is unfolding and the behaviors of all of the individuals right there in front of him, but around him as well, not only on defense, those 11 players on defense, but the 10 buddies that the player might have also. A few things that I want to mention here as we look at this, really pay close attention to what St. Brown might be attuned to. What information sources is he sensitive to that he's picking up, and how might he be using that to perpetually channel his intentions or his aims to act in a given way, the decisions he makes, the strategies that he comes up with, and then also ultimately how he adapts his actions. Remember, that's where our discussion is And this year, more than any other, we really want to talk about a player's form of life as well. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about that as this play heads I want you to think about St. Brown. We can see him getting a little flair and creativity here on the top of the route, just to have a little bit of hesitation to gain a little more separation. And when we think about this, this is really how St. Brown, in his third NFL season here out of USC, and we're talking about the youngest guy to ever record a 1,000-yard season. So in just the 3 short years at just 23 years old, St. Brown has been able to make a name for himself and to do some really special things at a very short period of time and be mentioned with some guys that are like all-timers, obviously, at the position. But St. Brown solves problems differently than his peers and his counterparts. We're talking about a guy that was a high 4.5 guy, 4.59, coming out of UFC at the USC at the NFL Combine back in 2021. Still a 5-star recruit in California. However, we're not talking about a speed demon or a speedster here. We're talking about a guy who's creative, who's authentic, who's adaptable. And we see it there at the top of his route. Even though we're not seeing it panned out or to where we can get a good glimpse of what he's doing, you can see a little bit of this style and flair. And that really is what allows him to gain the type of separation, rep to rep, route to route that he's able to get. And of course, that is really what dexterity is about, and truly being authentic at any respected position. But you can see as the ball approaches him now, look at where his head gets up into, right? We got to think about what he might be attuned to and what he's adapting around. When I say attuned, remember, I just mean sensitivity to specifying informational variables that are going to specify his affordances or opportunities to act, right? And what we find there is obviously typically, remember, behavior affords behavior. So how one's opponent or opponents behave is going to channel our opportunities to act. Our teammates or one's teammates are going to, and how they behave, are going to channel how we might be able to act. And we're going to see that unfold in just a bit. And then we're going to see some other information sources that a player might be attuned to and sensitive around as well. Typically, when you're talking about movement in the open field, movement in space, you're thinking about grass, green grass, opening gaps, in the space that is afforded between oneself and other moving parties, okay? And so really what we find from St. Brown is, even if it appears as though he's moving fast, he's moving at what I would refer to as ownership speed, or really we're seeing the embodiment of game speed or football speed. This entirety of the movement problem-solving process. He's moving as fast as he needs to solve the problem based on what he's picking up. And notice I'm kind of talking over that, what we just saw happen there. But there's some neat nuance here as we watch him. Again, behavior affords behavior. This dude right here, awfully, like this is an information source that is going to be awfully informative to him and how he might be able to act, him being St. Brown. I can't talk all that well tonight, obviously. But what you see from St. Brown is, look at this little nuance as he gets his perceptual gaze away from, I think this would be Levante David, right? Levante David and his movement and what might be unfolding back in front of him. Let me go back one frame here, okay? So you can imagine, we see how right here, what kind of angle David would be creating based on how he might be able to move, right? And we think about what that might mean. Look at, you can see how St. Brown is going to veer back and actually lose some ground, even if it's momentarily. And now we don't know if he's taking in the other information sources that would be unfolding from this way, coming in heading into him from a traffic standpoint. We don't know when he's seeing this information, when he might be detecting these information sources. We can only hypothesize and speculate based on the way that his movement behaviors and his kinematics are already lined up, that he is likely attuned right here to 54's posture and kinematics and where he might be able to go. So as that foot strikes the ground, we actually see him veer more towards this angle as a couple of other parties are coming this way, right? So we can think the more attuned, intentional, and adaptable movers, ultimately the more dexterous movers in the National Football League, are likely to become more perceptually connected to, more attuned and sensitive to multiple information sources. And I think we're seeing that from St. Brown here. Okay. Because what you see from him now, as he sees again this other opponent, this other cat entering the mix right here, watch when he might pick him up, when St. Brown might pick the opponent up, and how that changes his behavior. Okay. Right there. We see him actually put his arm out to the stiff arm, give himself that little extra feeler. It's like I've talked about before. It's kind of like a mixed martial artist playing this hand game right here. We see that with this stiff arm. This stiff arm wasn't intended to strike 54. It was there as a feeler to get a kinesthetic gauge to how close he might be to David, and if 54 himself was moving more into his space. At the same time, look at where his helmet is, and now he has locked in to another opponent who is going to present a threat and an obstacle. There's a challenge or perturbation here, but he knows he's got a buddy right here too. And it's likely that through his periphery, even if he is looking straight ahead right here and picking up the posture and kinematics, we see this right foot striking to the ground because he knows that he's going to come this way to try and head off St. Brown, that if St. Brown changes his behaviors ever so slightly, he's going to be able to veer around him and get help from number 8 right here. Okay. And he just navigates around that. We see this defender. I want to come back here. We see the defender 23. Now, he doesn't even really know that where this cat is because he is so focused on see ball, get ball. He's going to go just for the ball, right? That he kind of misses or fixes and freezes degrees of freedom right here on 14 St. Brown and forgets that there's a blocking teammate of St. Brown and an opponent. And when he strikes his foot into the ground, he was going to run right through and past him. But this guy, number 8, runs right past because he's like, 23 really isn't truly a threat. I believe in my guy, and my guy's got him, and he's got an angle. I'm backing up a little bit again because it's right here when St. Brown begins to get more space here, and he also sees all this space there, that both of those affordances are beckoning and calling for him. They are inviting him. They are invitations to act. They aren't just opportunities that one is going to perceive. They are invitations. They are beckoning and calling. But what we find from St. Brown right here, the really cool stuff, is as he navigates around this problem, this local movement problem in this curvilinear fashion, he starts to slow his movement behaviors because he perceives an affordance, a shared affordance, meaning how I behave and how my teammate behave. If we can behave in synergy and in relation to one another, it might present an opportunity or an affordance for us both to act. And if we can act in a synergistic way together, it gives me a greater likelihood of being able to be successful as well as my teammate, right? And that's really what we find from St. Brown here with Craig Reynolds, his blocker that is coming. And notice he slows down, actually puts this left arm up and basically tells him, he's basically signifying, I'm going to slow down here. to let you get up in front. And we got to give credit to Craig Reynolds here, who is on his horse. He is coming with speed and intentions to pick somebody off. And St. Brown gives him that opportunity to do just that. You know, we talk a lot here over the years at Football Beyond the Stats and our movement plays a week about curvilinear movement skill. Curvilinear movement skill isn't just moving around a circular or semicircular or angular type of way around cones or the numbers or the halves. In my perspective, true curvilinear movement skill is skillful in the way that it allows you to solve an emerging movement problem at the same time. It's not just about having the action capabilities. It's about being able to coordinate and control it in relation to moving teammates or opponents. And that's what we see right here from St. Brown. And he, again, veers off ever so slightly as Reynolds gives the space and enters that space as well. And we see it right there as he then turns this corner. We're going to see it better from the next angle, the next vantage or viewpoint, how attuned and what he might be attuned to. But we see this space now calling and just beckoning for him, even though this isn't very much space, or so it appears from this perspective. We see the dude right here that, let me see if I can get a circular up. We can see this dude taking the tumble that Reynolds just blocked. And again, it's likely that St. Brown himself is seeing this. We see Antoine Winfield Jr. Right here. Oops, I should probably do more of that. Who has to hurdle that dude who just went to the ground. We still see Levante David chasing back here, who likely isn't going to be a threat. We see numerous chasers, and all of these things become highly relevant, guys and gals, because when we talk about problem design, activity design in our learning environments, all of these information sources, all of these opponents and teammates become highly relevant to developing movement skill that is going to be transferable from the training environment to the game or competitive environment. And now we see St. Brown kind of do his thing as he walks into the end zone. It's more like a hurdle with a little bit of flair. And St. Brown is going to give credit where credit's due, I think, not only here when he starts celebrating with his teammates, but more so when he gets on the sideline, because Craig Reynolds not only showed the hustle that he did, and it wouldn't have been, this touchdown would not have been possible if it wasn't for Craig Reynolds, but also it's because of St. Brown's attunement to the shared affordances. But let's look right here. You know, I always love these other angles and these other viewpoints, right? What might St. Brown be attuned and intentional around, adaptable around? If just because somebody might be looking in a certain place or space, right? We see it right here. Doesn't necessarily mean that their perceptual pickup in their periphery isn't imperative or important. It's likely that he's seeing these orange creamsicle jerseys of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defenders, and he's able to pick up those flashes as well as they enter the space. We even see his arm. What might he be pointing at, and who might he be pointing to? He's essentially navigating and really kind of connecting to the movement problem in his own unique way. And I wish we would have this viewpoint or this film pickup here from a little later on, probably from right when he catches the ball. But nonetheless, this is exactly what we're working with here with what the NFL has given us, right? But he's pointing, and he's pointing to whom it is that he wants Reynolds to block, right? And we don't see Reynolds. He's off of the screen right now. But we're going to see him enter the mix right here and come pick up this dude and pick him up with bad intentions, right? Watch right here, and there it is, right? We can see this all from this vantage point now, and we see what and where St. Brown is looking to, what he might be looking for, and what it might mean for his intentions and his actions. Again, this is telling the movement problem solving story. And if you've been with us here at all at our movement plays of the week at Football Beyond the Stats, you know we love to speculate and hypothesize about this story and try to tell it from their human movement system. One of the things that we find, look at where his head is at. Look at what he might be attuned and sensitive to. I know that I'm beating the dead horse here, but we really can't too much. He isn't just moving for movement's sake. He's not just running the curve or the angle or the arc. He is running with his eyes and his vision and his perception leading the way. We perceive to act, we act to perceive, and it's this tight reciprocal relationship between the two. Just like there is a reciprocal relationship between the problem and the solver, and the two coming together with their changing states of organization. And then we can kind of see this from St. Brown here, maybe if the video catches up with me, as he continues to solve this problem. He feels where Antoine Winfield Jr. is, and he acts accordingly. Again, movement problem to movement problem. This part cannot be understated here also, because especially a defensive back in the open field, going low on a guy, you have a previous knowledge, you have sort of a memory of that, you have an intention around it, that you're trying to pick your feet up in any way, shape, or form that you can, whether it's in this slight jump, hop, hurdle that we're going to see from St. Brown, whether it's just kicking and moving the feet in sort of way a running back would if a guy's going low from behind. But all of these things, guys and gals, are pieces and aspects that make this movement solution highly functional, again, to the what is. The what is out there and what movement problem and how that movement problem is speaking to the player. I want to talk about a couple of things here first and foremost. I mentioned that St. Brown isn't built on speed. He's built more on elusiveness, and that elusiveness is built on attunement, intentionality, and adaptability. It's been like that for a long, long time. You know, we're talking about a guy, I think, who's 5'11", 200-ish pounds, maybe even lighter and smaller than that. Yes, he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school into the USC. He's explosive, but he's not fast or speedy or a burner, at least from wide receiver standards. But we're talking about a guy who has a brother who plays in the NFL, another brother who plays college football at a high level, I think at Stanford. His dad was actually a two-time Mr. Universe, I want to say. His dad is John Brown, who I know from back in my good old bodybuilding days, as you see a few bodybuilding trophies back there. And we're talking about a guy whose form of life is really about elusiveness, but it's about this unique and authentic style and swag. And we see it, whether he's on podcasts and on interviews, or we see it here in his truly authentic and truly individualized and honest expression of who he is as he solves these problems. Why did I pause here? I want you guys to think about how you might be able to design a learning environment that would call for this type of action. Not trying to force this movement problem or replicate it or even simulate it per se, but thinking about how we might set a movement problem and how it might change repetition to repetition in a repetition without repetition fashion. Remember, no two problems are the same, neither are any two solutions. So what we want to do is guide and channel the learner to be able to solve and repeat the solving of the movement problems that are unfolding in front of him, right? This type of movement problem is one that I actually set up with the skilled players or the offensive players that I might work with. Typically, we will actually start it at one of these hashes, okay? And so I'm gonna try to kind of highlight what we might do. It would either be at this hash or this hash, and I'll admit that typically it's actually from this near hash here, the near hash close to the sideline, to get them to exploit the space. So we'll kind of get to that place, but we could certainly start here, and we actually might have a defender such as where 54 is entering the mix. We might have a chasing defender, just like it is unfolding here. So, ironically enough, if you were to see some videos of players that I work with, these are similar types of movement behaviors that we might set up. We may actually, let me get my arrow back here. We may actually have a player that's usually about 5 yards deep, starting on the same hash, moving it this type of way or fashion. So usually we will not have them this close. Maybe the chaser would be, but likely if we're starting on one hash to the next, it's usually a 5 yard separation, maybe a little bit further. But again, it depends on the gaps that we're witnessing when we analyze the movement skill of the player. And then we would change that repetition to repetition. Okay, so again, there would be rep without rep. So that player is practicing and repeating the process of solving that problem. So one time the guy might be 5 yards away, the next rep they might be 10 yards away, the next rep they might be 3 yards away, the next rep they might be 7 yards away. You kind of get where I'm going with this. Or you could change the opponent entirely. And so even if it's two guys starting 5 yards away from one another, they would have different movement intentions, different strategies, different tactics, but also different action capabilities, right? So you might have two different linebackers starting here in the movement problem, and we probably have to advance this to about right here, right? And again, we likely wouldn't have them this tight or this close. But then we would put players typically chasing, so they might not be crashing in nearly in the same fashion as number 23 is here. But it's likely that we would have one coming in hot from this direction as we see this cat back here, and we would likely have one chasing from behind, where actually St. Brown's teammate is coming from, Craig Reynolds. Okay, so this is just how we might set up a 1v3, or then maybe 2v3, or maybe 3v3. Okay, how would we do the 2v3? Obviously, exactly where this guy's coming from, or where we're about to see Craig Reynolds come from. That's usually how we might set it up, because what we know then, and those guys are always going to be coming from a slightly different place, a slightly different position, which is going to change how far away they are from the player, how that player might actually intend to move, and how they might act. It also is going to change velocities and speeds. And they're all going to enter this highly alive movement problem. So again, no two problems are the same. We're not trying to recreate this per se, but we know that this type of thing, especially for a wide receiver or a tight end, and now what we're finding more and more running backs running option routes and arrow routes across the middle, we're finding more and more players, offensive players, who might be in a similar predicament or circumstance as St. Brown is here. And then now, and I pause again here, because we will also set up curvilinear movement skill opportunities in this same fashion. Okay, usually from a hash again, and I'm going to just draw these out. I'm giving you a couple different movement problems that we would usually do. Okay, usually we're maybe setting it up where I want the guy to enter in this type of fashion. Okay, even though St. Brown is, obviously scooted up a little bit. So just imagine if those cones, these cones that I just drew, were essentially just out in front of him, right? Usually we would start at one of these hashes and then tell him that he would be looking to stay outside of the cones. And then we would have pursuing players entering the workspace. That workspace being, let me get some arrows. The workspace being, something like from here, and then it would open up to there. Okay. So they're running through a tighter space to move into a wider or deeper space. Okay, that it would open up in this type of width, and it could be done. Usually we would do it, say 15, 20, 25 yards away from a line to gain or an end zone, like it might be here. So, ironically enough, pretty similar to what we could or might do in the learning environment. And then with that, we would actually have, usually, I would say in this type of situation or setup, we might have a teammate that's coming from behind as the chaser. We might actually have a chaser who's coming from behind, so that player, this offensive skill player, like St. Brown in this example, can't spend too much time pitter pattering or doing like an agility ladder activity, in this space. He has to be more decisive. He has to feel and become attuned to sensitive information, or the sensitivity of information. And then usually what we would do is a player entering this workspace, usually maybe not this many players, because this problem gets awfully complex awfully quickly. Usually we're going to be talking about a chaser from behind, a teammate chasing from behind, and then one or two defenders, say in this fashion, entering that workspace. So again, we're going to find curvilinear movement skill from the player who's controlling and handling the ball, but he's able to solve this movement problem in his own authentic fashion, in that which what is unfolding. Again, the what is that unique and peculiar movement problem out in front of him, and every single time it's going to be slightly different. Okay. So great stuff from St. Brown. Obviously, here, there was a lot to unpack today, guys and gals. I wanted to show you a few activities because there would at least be two of them that I might utilize slightly similar if I was working with the offensive player in this scenario or situation, or the defensive players for that matter. So hopefully some of that makes some sense. I know we got a little long-winded today, but I hope it was helpful. If you have questions, you have thoughts, whatever it is that you want to interact around, put them in the comment section below. If you like this week's video or any of our movement plays of the week, give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. And for Sean Mishka, the Movement Miyagi, and Football Beyond the Stats and our movement play of the week, this has been week 6. I will talk to you guys next week in week 7.